right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning into our keynote webinar with Dr. Martin Entz on organic no-till. Sorry for those. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Johanna Murray. I'm the extension coordinator for Peace Country Beef and Forage Association. We're an applied research association based out of Fairview, Alberta, and we work on providing accurate local information on forage crops and cocktail crops to our local members. If you have any questions about what we do for research, membership, that sort of thing, you can, or if you have suggestions for webinars for us to do in the future, please do get in touch. We've got our website, peacecountrybeef.ca. You can also email us at info@pcbfa.ca, or you can message us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Quickly, I'm kind of blowing through this because I'm assuming most of you have logged into our previous webinars, but a bit of housekeeping before we get started. There is a raise hand function here. You can use, Martin will be pausing through his presentation for questions, and you can hit the raise hand button if you want to ask over your mic, or you can type it in the Q&A box as well. And we'll answer your questions as we go. There's also an option to log in through phone audio if you're having issues hearing what we're saying and that sort of stuff. I know there can be some broadband issues when you're trying to tune in from home. So you can use your phone audio. There's an option there when you log in. As well, if your internet crashes or something, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar to everybody who's registered sometime next week. I know our recording from last week was a little slow going out, but we did get it out eventually. So I think that's all I have to say. So I will let Martin come over and take over, because I know he's here who you all really want to hear from today.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I like to check the weather, and I've got the weather for Peace River here, and I guess it's -1 right now. So that's my way of trying to identify with life where you are. I'm really happy to be presenting this today. I'd like to send you my greetings from the University of Manitoba. I'm just going to ask Johanna if you can see this slide on the screen.
I can see your forecast, but I can't see your slide.
Okay, that one hasn't shown up yet, eh? Okay, how's that?
Not so far. Not
so far. Let me get rid of this forecast.
You might have to. There's your video.
I'm sharing the screen.
Yeah. You might have to change what you're sharing to your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So let me stop sharing. Sorry about that. Let me share a screen again, and I'll go to this. Yeah, maybe that'll work.
That should be okay. Oh yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay,
Perfect.
now I'm going to put it on full screen, and you can tell me whether this works. Do you have the full screen?
Not quite yet. Oh no, there it goes.
It should say reducing tillage in organic crop production.
Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay, good. Then I'll proceed. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Greetings from the University of Manitoba. You know, this is the Easter weekend. It's a time of renewal, and I just wish all of you in your part of Alberta well. I know these are unprecedented times, both health-wise and economically, and I know you're all eager to get back in the field, as am I, and get back to normal. So really happy to share this story with you, and if there's any problems, Johanna will just give me some instructions to either stop or change things. So we have been interested in reducing tillage and organic crop production for a long time. My background is I come from the no-till era. I did my PhD at the University of Saskatchewan in the late 1980s on winter wheat and no-till winter wheat, and looked at a lot of the water conservation and elements and drought tolerance. And after that, I came to the University of Manitoba in the early 1990s, and I did a lot of work on no-till forages. You know, we learned that, what is it now? Fescue is difficult to kill with glyphosate, something that you knew. So, you know, I've got a long history of working on no-till, and then I started working on organic production and got really interested in that, and always looking for ways of reducing tillage in organic production. And recently, if you read the Western Producer, there was an article that they wrote. I mentioned at a conference that if you had to choose one thing to improve your soil health, whether it's plant diversity or no-till, the research shows that plant diversity is actually more important. That was a little controversial, but it's really the combination of the two that is even better, plant diversity and reducing tillage or no-till. So, you know, this is a challenging subject. So now I've sharing my work with, well, two grad students who worked with me. One is Carolyn Auld, who's on the right. She's now at Laval University in Quebec. She was a very good PhD student. She grew up on an organic farm in Quebec. So she came ready to embark on this, and some of what I'll talk about today is from her PhD. And the other one is Kristen McMillan, who's was my master's student, and she worked on things like the wide blade cultivator, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So I'm going to advance the slide, and Johanna, can you see the next slide?
Yep, looks good to me.
Okay, so this is a picture of an organic farmer just 30 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, and there are really not very many organic farmers in the Red River Valley of Manitoba. You know, I don't know why that is. Maybe, you know, farming has been far too profitable. Maybe people are just not, you know, the farms are too large and they're not really set up for no-till. But this is, or organic, I should say. But this picture is thanks to Scott Beaton, who is a young individual in his sort of early 30s, and he's farming about 800, 900 acres organically. And this is his seeding rig. And I just want to show this because over the years, I have experienced a lot of organic farmers who are direct seeding their early seeded crops, things like peas and wheat, oats, and actually having pretty good success. So I wanted to just spend a moment talking about that, because some of the other things that I'm going to share with you are maybe not that commonplace. They're sometimes difficult to implement. They're new ideas that we haven't really had a lot of on-farm experience with, but this is one that we've had a lot of on-farm experience with. So what is happening in this picture is the organic crop is being seeded into what was probably an oat cover crop, which was seeded you know, later in the fall. It grew, it froze, and you know, it's a very nice seed bed for putting your organic crop into. And if we're going to go with this technique, with this direct seeding, then things like higher seeding rates are really important. They're important in organic anyways, but they're especially important if you're going to reduce your tillage. There are other ways of increasing the competitiveness of the crop. Intercropping can help. Not everybody is interested in intercropping, but it does make the plant more competitive against weeds. There are some post-seeding tillage options. So I'm sure you're familiar with the rotary hoe. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can access some of Steve Shirtliff's videos from the University of Saskatchewan. It is a good minimum till weeding implement that can be used before ground crack and crops like peas. It can be even used in the growing pea crop, in the growing oat crop. So there are options like that. And the reason I'm spending a little bit of time on it, and is because direct seeding just means you have moisture at the surface. And it's a problem in organic farming when we have some very dry springs and we do pre-seeding tillage. We can sometimes just dry out the seed bed and have a problem. And I put down as a fourth option for weed control, variety choice. Now this next slide that hopefully is on your screen shows two things. On the left, this is some work we did on seeding rates in wheat. And you can see we're going from 150 to 350 plants per meter squared. And we get a 12 bushel increase. So seeding rates are important. And then on the right, we've got 5 different varieties of wheat: Wascata, AAC Tenacious, Brandon, Cardale, and AAC Tradition, seeded at 3 different plant population densities. And it's pretty obvious that with most of these varieties, high seeding rates really reduce the amount of dockage in the crop. And there are some variety differences. So here, for example, AAC Brandon, which is the most popular variety in hard red spring wheat in Manitoba. It's probably not the case in where you are, but it actually is not as good under organic as some other varieties because it's just not that competitive with weeds. So that's just by way of introduction, some of the ideas behind resting. I think that that is something that, especially if you're seeding a crop really early, like peas or oats, it can be seeded early and you may not have to do any tillage, and you may already be doing that. Okay, so what about this crazy idea of no-till in organic? Well, I want to give credit to Carolyn Auld here for these slides. This is the work that she did on her PhD at the University of Manitoba. And if we look at the map here, there's 2 stars. One is in Brazil, where there's been a lot of work on no-till with cover crops. And then in the United States, the Rodale Center in Pennsylvania, and also some work in Maryland, where they looked at what they called rotational no-till in organic, or occasional no-till, comes from Germany. And what they did is they would, in these longer season growing areas, whether you're in Pennsylvania or whether you're in Germany, you could plant a crop like, let's say, wheat. You could put a cover crop in after the wheat. There's quite a bit of time to grow a lot of biomass. And then you could either, crimp it or have it freeze and then plant your crop the next year. We're in a much shorter season region, so that's more challenging. So if you look at the classic United States example, you should be able to see the planting of soybeans into rolled cereal mulch on the left. This is a picture that comes from the Rodale Institute website. You've got your rye crop, which would have been seeded, I think my cursor should work, which should have been seeded in the fall. And then in the springtime, once this rye flowers, you crimp, roll it, and then no-till in this case, soybeans. I'm going to show you a picture of this system in Ontario later. because some Ontario farmers who are in a much shorter growing season region than Pennsylvania have done an adaptation of this, which I think is quite practical. But this is sort of your classic organic no-till idea. But you know, we're not in the warm, long season regions of the the eastern U.S. We're in the Canadian Prairie region where the growing season is short. You know, how do we do organic no-till in that environment? We've got 1,800 growing degree days, maybe 350 millimeters of precipitation. We do know that if we seed crops in the fall as cover crops in Manitoba, we have done quite a bit of research on this, and we know we need about 6 tons per hectare. That's about 6,000 pounds per acre of dry matter, not wet matter, to suppress weeds. We're not getting that with the fall crop. We're just getting maybe 2 tons per hectare. And the other big difference between our systems and those in this area of the U.S. is that we don't have a lot of animal manure available, at least not for the whole farm. And so we're also more reliant on legumes. Whereas if you look at some of these organic systems, in the U.S. or even in parts of Ontario or maybe parts of southern Alberta, there's so much livestock manure around. It's the cover crop, the whole system doesn't rely on legumes to the extent that ours does. So what we work on, Joanna, that you see the slide, it says the organic rotational no-till system for Manitoba.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, and when I move my cursor, can you see it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. So what we did is took a really basic organic farming system where we've got, in year one, in the spring, we, kill the weeds, then seed a cover crop. And traditionally what farmers would do here is, maybe they'd have sweet clover seeded the previous year, and that would be the green manure here. Or you would seed, let's say, a pea crop here, or a pea oat crop, or maybe faba beans as your green manure, and then you would disc it, kill it in midsummer. And the field really sits fallow then for the fall, which is not always desirable. So what we worked on is a slightly different system. We would seed our cover crop in the spring. So we would do tillage and then establish the green manures. And then in the midsummer, we would use the blade roller, which for us was a brand new piece of equipment. We had not had, until Carolyn came along, we really hadn't worked with it. Well, I guess we had one other grad student, Iris Vaisman, who worked with it. So we used the crimper roller, which, what it does is it's like a hay bind where it crimps the stems. But what I really like about it is it doesn't uproot them. It leaves the plants rooted, and the plants will die, and then we can zero till into there the next year very, very nicely with a no-till disc drill. So what we were interested in is what are the plant species that we could use here in this green manure to make this system work so that the following year we could go in with a no-till disc drill and seed into that dead mulch and then get a crop which was nice and clean. So that was really our goal. Now, let me just explain this slide. This here is a green manure where we mixed hairy vetch with barley. And we would seed that the previous year. We would blade roll it. The barley would die with the blade roller, but the hairy vetch would not. The hairy vetch keeps growing. But we would pick a hairy vetch variety that would winter kill. And so in the springtime, you're left with this dry mat over the soil surface. And then we would knife in, we would, disc in the crop into that mulch. And over here, this plot here is where we use the hairy vetch barley, and that's a no-till organic wheat crop. That's a pretty good looking crop with no weeds. So I want to show you a video of this. And so I'm going to go back to, probably creating a problem for myself here. I'm going to share something else. Oh, there's Donald Trump. Joanna, can you see this tractor on the field?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So this is a plot version, right? But so here we have a field that we seeded to hairy vetch and barley the previous year. We blade rolled it, and the blade rolling, it takes care of wild oats. It really takes care of the thistles. It doesn't kill them, but it knocks the tops off, and then the hairy vetch just really competes well with them. And then we would always take hairy vetch varieties that we know could winter kill. We did this work in Alberta and Lethbridge as well, and the hairy vetch wouldn't winter kill. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. And then we would go and zero till into here. And you can find this video on our website, but this is a simple offset no-till disc drill. And you can see it's cutting into that dry mulch really nicely and planting the flax crop. So that's an organic crop going into there. And I just wanted to stop it here. I know you're really excited to see the seeds. So am I. I love this video. I watch it 3 times a week. But you can see the barley there. You can see that barley straw. And the nice thing about blade rolling this mixture is that the blade roll will kill the barley or any wild oats or any foxtail, any annual grassy plant that you have in there. And then the hairy vetch is very viney. It keeps growing over top of that. So what ends up happening is the barley lays on the soil surface. The barley is high in carbon, and then the very nitrogen-rich hairy vetch lays on top of the barley, and that reduces the decomposition of the hairy vetch, and it gives us a nice slow-release nitrogen from the hairy vetch. And if we did not have that barley there and the hairy vetch was laying on the soil surface, it would decompose faster. It would give us less weed control. So now I'm going to carry on here. We're just opening up the furrow where we cut, and you can see the nice moisture. There's a flax seed in there somewhere, and there we go. And here it comes again. And that person on the tractor is Keith Bamford. He's really the one person who developed this system. He was my head technician for many years. That's not a sophisticated planter. It's a plot version of an offset no-till disc drill. In the springtime, we've never had a lot of problem with it cutting through the mulch because the mulch is bone dry. You have a little bit of a challenge with once the mulch is cut, the wind will pick it up. But it has worked. It's worked quite well. And now I'm going back to the screen, and I think I'm gonna stop here to see if there's any questions or comments people would like to make. I've got more to say, but I thought, I've just shown you some information that you may be familiar with, you may not be, and if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Or maybe you could type them in and Joanna could share them with me.
Yeah, so if you do have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, or you can use the raise hand button and I will come unmute you so you can ask the question. We'll give you a few more minutes or a minute or so to get that done, and then we'll move on.
So just while we're waiting, you can see in the middle here, there's the flax crop coming through the mulch. And the level of hairpinning on something like this is can be a concern but the fact that the mulch is anchored makes all the difference. And I think if you think about that for a little while, if you're dealing with, you know, stuff coming out of the back of the combine and it's swimming around the field and it's going to hairpin a lot easier. This material, because the blade roller did not cut it, it just crimped it and left it on the ground. It's much easier to avoid hairpinning. Okay, should I carry on?
We have one question here.
Great.
Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. So the hairy vetch now, how do you know, like, it's not real common. This is a new thing for most of this corner of the world, as far as I know. But you find a variety that does or doesn't winter kill. How do you achieve that?
You there's two types of hairy vetch. Well, there's what we call hairy vetch of northern origin and hairy vetch of southern origin. And there are some of the seed companies, like Imperial Seed and many, many others who sell hairy vetch, you have to ask them for the hairy vetch of northern origin, because if you're going to seed it in the springtime, the hairy vetch of southern origin is going to flower and produce seed. And the hairy vetch of northern origin, it is going to stay pretty well vegetative in that first year. And so you don't have any volunteer hairy vetch problems later. And then the seeding date is very important. If you seed the hairy vetch of northern origin, or the hairy vetch that we would be working with, if we seeded that like winter wheat at the beginning of September or the end of August, it would overwinter as a seedling. But it's been our experience that when we seed the hairy vetch of northern origin in the springtime, it grows really well right up till freeze up, and it winter kills. So now when we did that in Lethbridge, it did not winter kill. But your region is very different. It's much colder. So yeah, I think it's something that requires a little bit of research, just so that you're not choosing the wrong variety or testing whether it works.
Because I've talked to producers who have seeded it, and they do have the volunteer in the spring, like conventional guys, so they end up spraying it out. Yeah. But what we're exploring, an idea we're looking at, is putting in the swath grazing mix, including the hairy vetch and fall rye in that. So it would be a June seeded crop. But we want both of those two crops to overwinter. Like we'd have oats and peas and some other varieties in for the swath grazing. And then we want to allow that to grow until mid-June of next year. And then if we can terminate that with some form of rolling and crimping.
Yeah.
And then direct seed.
Yeah.
We're leaning at hemp if our soil analysis comes back promising on that area.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, then you're actually using that as a overwintering annual. I don't know how consistently a June seeded hairy vetch would survive your winter. Have you tested that before?
No.
Okay, I think it's probably going to be hit and miss if you have a, you're colder. But the later you seed that hairy vetch, the greater chance it has for survival. And if you send me an email, or I'll send Joanna a paper that we wrote on that, which looks at different seeding dates. But I like the way you're using the hairy vetch because you're matching the biology of the plant to your utilization, which is the swath grazing, and then you want something in the spring. So it is a versatile plant in that way. Yeah.
So
Interesting.
it would be seeded in a highly competitive crop with the oats, with peas, and several other varieties besides the vetch and the rye. Is it possible that there will be enough competition in there to slow down the development of the vetch and the rye to allow it to be like if it's slowed down so it's better set for overwintering?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I've not done the research. I don't know of anybody who has, but I think I would suspect that may actually happen. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Awesome. I see we have a few other questions here as well. Mackay wants to know if he can till after seeding or in midsummer and still end up with similar results.
With the hairy vetch. The thing about the hairy vetch, I'm going to talk about the nitrogen later. It's a full season green manure, and yes, you're not going to get the same results if you till it in the summer because, well, you're not going to have the mulch to suppress weeds, and you're also not going to fix nearly as much nitrogen. The thing about hairy vetch is it's a second half team. If you think of a football team that does terrible in the first half and does really well in the second half, it definitely is a very small, it doesn't put on a lot of biomass. If you seed it at the end of May, it doesn't have a lot of biomass on it by the middle of July. It does all, that's where the barley really produces the most biomass. It definitely does most of its growth in the latter half of the season. Does a very good job of taking advantage of when conditions get a bit cooler in the fall. So if you're looking at, if I understand you correctly, if you're terminating your green manure in the middle of the summer, then, I mean, that's the system that we've used for many years. Then you're basically got exposed soil, and the best thing you can do is put on a cover crop so you don't, so you maintain your soil health and you don't have erosion and you suppress weeds.
Another question from which is the best system you recommend for a producer? Do you recommend no-till or reduced till, a combination?
What I'm talking about here is reduce. If you're an organic farmer and you're growing grains and you do not have livestock and you just want to reduce tillage in some years, that's the system that I'm describing here right now. And in that case, if you're an organic farmer, we think you can reduce your tillage once or twice every 6 years. So once or twice every 6 years, you can reduce your fall tillage, you eliminate your fall tillage and zero till your crop. Tillage is part of organic farming. You can't eliminate it completely.
Pierre Filion wants to know, do you find that you lose nutrients from the mulch staying on top compared to incorporating it into the soil?
Very good question. That's peas, and we rolled the pea green manure in, beginning of August, and we left it on the surface for the rest of the year, and then zero tilled into it, even in situations where we didn't have a lot of weeds, and it worked in terms of weeds. We ended up having a mystery. We appear to have lost some nitrogen. We just didn't know why the wheat wasn't doing well. I mean, we had lost some nitrogen. We measured nitrogen volatilization, and that was only about 7% of the nitrogen, so we couldn't really account for it. So the thing about hairy vetch that I really like is it produces so much nitrogen. It produces, between 140 and 180 pounds per acre of nitrogen. So there's never a nitrogen shortage after something like you're seeing on the screen here, because there's just so much nitrogen in the system. If you reduce your tillage in an organic system, you can have a low protein system if you're short of nitrogen. So there may be a little bit of nitrogen volatilized here, but not nearly as much as rolling peas in the middle of the summer. There was some work done by Henry Jansen back in Lethbridge, back in the 80s on, Indian head lentil as a summer fallow substitute. And they lost like half the nitrogen to basically evaporation or volatilization when they killed it in the middle of the summer with herbicides. So if you're in that hot period, you can lose a lot of that nitrogen, although there hasn't been a ton of research done on that. But the thing about this is the plant is, it's growing through the entire season, and it's only dead when the temperatures are low. So the chances of losing that nitrogen are lower. But I like the question, and it's good that you're thinking about it. Okay.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions if we want to do them real quick. One is terminating alfalfa or clover with no-till. We might touch on that later on. I don't know.
You know, that the blade roller, it's funny because I get that question comes up right away, and I just go, well, forget it. You cannot terminate alfalfa or clover with the blade roller. But then I ran into somebody at a meeting, a farmer who was actually using the blade roller to kill sweet clover, or to really set it back. And they were explaining they hit it twice with the blade roller, with the roller, and they said it did a pretty good job of killing the plant. So I learned something there. I think red clover and alfalfa, I'm pretty confident that the blade roller does almost nothing to those things. What it can do in an alfalfa crop, it can really the thistle though, because it crimps. And so the alfalfa is not bothered very much by that crimping, but the thistle is. So the thistle is quite tall. I mean, you might as well just take a hay crop, but if, it does work. So on the thistle, but in terms of killing red clover or alfalfa, we've never had any success with it.
All right. I see Orest Frederick has a question. He's got his hand raised. So if you want to ask. I can't unmute him, so we'll come back to him next time we pause for questions, I think.
Okay, great. So I jumped ahead to a slide. It says research questions. And so remember what I'm talking about here is a system where we're, no livestock, straight grain. We're gonna take 1 year to grow green manure because we need the nitrogen. We don't have nitrogen coming from animal manure. And so the questions that Carolyn asked in her PhD is how much mulch can we produce? And number 2, how much mulch is needed to suppress weeds? Number 3, what about nitrogen dynamics? How much nitrogen is in the mulch, and then how does it break down? And then number 4, what's the cash crop yield? How does it compare to, conventional no-till or organic where we till the soil? So let's go take a look at that. And what she looked at was a number of mixtures, basically barley. We had hairy vetch.
I can't see your new slide. We're still on the organic rotational no-till.
Oh, you still are? Okay. It seemed to work if I stop sharing and start sharing again. Let's,
there we go. That looks good.
Okay. So you got the hairy vetch flower on the right there with the purple flowers?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, so what we did is we were interested in just, a little bit more about how this system works. So, and I'm not just going to talk about hairy vetch today. I'm going to talk about other machines and, but, we're really looking at, what are the combinations of species? So we had these two-way species mixtures of barley pea, barley oilseed radish, barley sunflower, barley hairy vetch, or three-way mixtures where we had, barley, pea, oilseed radish, barley, pea, sunflower, or four-way mixes where we had barley, pea, oilseed radish, and sunflower as annual forages that we seeded. And what we found is that the best weed control are the ones that contained hairy vetch. It didn't matter what else we put in there, but pure hairy vetch or barley hairy vetch gave us the best weed control the following year. And so the hairy vetch, the way we're using it here is we're seeding it at 25 pounds an acre. So it's a very high seeding rate. Most mixtures for grazing, they're throwing a little bit of hairy vetch in that mixture. That's not going to get you much weed control. Remember, these are straight grain systems where we want a lot of nitrogen, so we want high seeding rates of hairy vetch, and we want to have enough mulch so that we can no-till the following year. So what we found is that hairy vetch, it has an extended growth period. So at rolling in midsummer, so when we roll it, it's the only species that was not killed with the crimper roller. Sunflower, barley, pea, everything else was killed. By late fall, we were producing about 9 to 11 tons per hectare. That's about 10,000 pounds per acre of dry matter, not wet matter, dry matter. And then by over winter, the hairy vetch would be killed, and then in the spring we'd be left with about 6 or 8 tons per hectare of dry matter, and that's about what you need to get good weed control. So this next slide, you should be able to see somebody's hand holding some dead mulch here. So we were always taking a quarter square meter and measuring the mulch biomass, and that mulch biomass gives us physical impedance of weeds. We noticed a lot of rodent activity below the mulch, so we're getting a lot of good weed seed predation by mice in those fields, way more than without. And we also know that there's a lot of carabid beetle activity under those mulches. And we get improved soil properties just from having a mulch. So what we found is that if we had 6 to 7 sort of tons per hectare, or about 6 to 7,000 pounds per acre of dry biomass, we got good weed control for that one season with certain weeds. There were some weeds that we did not get, that this system doesn't work for. If you have really bad wild oats, we found that it was not good. It's not great if you have a lot of quackgrass. It's not great on dandelion, although dandelions are not that big a deal in organic production in our experience. And it's not great if you have high levels of these weeds. Then we would recommend next spring going in there and giving it a quick tillage before you seed. But we've had many, many successes. So here you should see, this is the slide that I've been leading up to. Joanna, do you see this wheat crop in here?
Yes.
Okay, so on the left is where we have just a barley mulch by itself, and on the right, we have just hairy vetch by itself. So if we look at so we no-tilled the wheat crop in here in both sides. And if you look at where we had barley, we've got a lot of weeds in the understory. If you look where we had hairy vetch, you can see this mat, which is being picked up by somebody's hand here between the rows of wheat. So the cover crop mulches with hairy vetch were effective at reducing weed biomass by 50 to 90%. And we did this we've probably used this system for 10 years, and it's very, very effective. Unless you have those really, really bad patches of quackgrass or really bad patches of wild oats or thistle. So, so this was, this is, showed us that that system could be successful in our part of the world. And remember, this was aimed at straight grain farmers who were just growing grains, and they needed that 1 year of green manure to add a lot of nitrogen. We also tried to extend this system. So the plot on the right I'll show you some pictures later, but we tried to, you know, seed flax into here next year, still not no-tilling. And so we asked ourselves the question, how many years could we go with a no-till system if we had a really nice mulch of hairy vetch? And the question was, you know, 2 years in a row was about it. But I just wanted to share this slide, first of all, because I've been, you know, going on about hairy vetch. And this is some green manure dry matter yields from Manitoba from years of research. And over here, you've got the average dry matter yield. So if we look at chickling vetch, you know, 3,400, pea about, you know, 4,300. You could probably do better in the peas with peas. Lentil, oat pea, you know, you're looking at 5 tons per hectare, about 5,000 pounds per acre. Alfalfa, faba bean, hairy vetch here at 4,300 pounds per acre of dry matter. That's when we would kill the hairy vetch with a disc, like we always managed our green manures in organic. So if we plant a chickling vetch or a pea crop or an oat pea crop in the springtime, or an alfalfa crop in the springtime, and we don't, you know, we don't get to killing it until early August or sometime, we're not producing any more biomass with hairy vetch than we are with any other legume. But at the bottom here, I've got hairy vetch using the blade roller, where we let it grow for the entire season. And over many years of experiments, we can produce about 8,000 pounds per acre of dry matter. Now that gives us, if we use this universal number of, you know, your legume yield times 2.5% is a good estimate of how much nitrogen it actually fixed. You can see that hairy vetch is hands down the winner among all the other legumes. And that's important because if you're going to reduce tillage in organic, where you're not adding any urea or, you know, any nitrogen fertilizer, you have to, you have to overwhelm the system a little bit with nitrogen to make sure you are feeding both the soil and the crop. And so this picture here is kind of the conclusion of Carolyn's PhD. You know, what she came up with is this rotational no-till system where we, on the upper left, we seed the barley hairy vetch. We blade roll the barley when it's full flat, when it's you know, just headed, and it's already, at that point it's already fertilized, and you might get some volunteer barley plants, but they're not going to bother anybody. And then the vetch is laid down, and then it regrows very quickly. So the next picture here on the right is the vetch comes back very quickly, and here we are no-till seeding into that, and here's an organic no-till wheat crop. And then the question we had is, how long could we not till this field? And of course, it depends a lot on the weed history. But there is enough nitrogen in this hairy vetch mulch to carry another crop quite easily. You could grow oats, you could grow flax, you could maybe grow hemp, I'm not sure. So we did an experiment, and this next picture shows you bigger slides, bigger plots, I should say. And on the left here, we've got an organic tilled system, and we actually seeded that with a Bourgault air seeder with a double shoot. It's got the, you know, the wider seed bed utilization. And then we compared that to flax, where we no-till seeded into the mulch. And here we use a no-till disc drill. And it's interesting, in a number of years, these yields were quite comparable, because this system on the left, it's off to an earlier start, but you're going to have a lot more weeds. So, you know, this is going to depend on the farm. It's going to depend on your weed spectrum. You know, it's going to depend on a few other things, whether you cut ruts in your field during harvest. We found that we could take this organic no-till system into a second year in some cases. And we actually tried it for 5 consecutive years, and we actually published a paper on that. And it really fell apart after about 4 years. We even put sheep in to graze weeds and did all those fancy things, and it didn't work that well. So you should see a slide on there that says nitrogen dynamics. I just wanted to, I'm going to get to talk about some machinery, and we're going to make fun of Southern Alberta in a minute, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about nitrogen. We were interested in the nitrogen release characteristics from these mulches in a no-till organic system. And so one of the pieces of data that I'm going to share with you, you should be able to see a slide that says mulch decomposition. And what Carolyn did, she worked awfully hard. She created these little pouches with different material in there, either vetch or pea or radish or sunflower or flax or barley. And then over the course of, she did this 2 consecutive years, and she looked at the decomposition of this plant material over the course of almost a year. And so as you might imagine, the plant that decomposed the most quickly and released its nutrients was the radish. The plant that released its carbon, decomposed the slowest, was the barley. So we also measured the nitrogen release from these, and we, based on this, we were able to sort of have some confidence that the hairy vetch would deliver its nitrogen over the next 2 years. So this is a long way of saying that we think we can grow two no-till crops after the hairy vetch mulch if we don't have a really, really bad weed problem. So I'm going to stop for questions in a moment. Before I leave the blade roller, I wanted to show you a couple of examples that I thought are kind of thinking about the future. So the picture on the bottom left here is the blade roller from the Rodale Center in Pennsylvania. This is Jeff Moyer. He used to be the director or the farm manager at Rodale, and he's the one who championed this machine in the United States and by extension into Canada. And so, and the system that people have been looking at, as I mentioned earlier, is to grow fall rye, wait till fall rye flowers, and then use the blade roller, and it does a good job of killing the fall rye and then no-tilling soybeans into there. Well, what about doing that in short season regions? So this is a picture I took from an Ontario farm. It's about 40 kilometers north of Guelph. And they planted, this is an organic farm, and they planted fall rye here on this patch of land last fall. And then over here, outside the red portion of the field, they tilled the rye cover crop in spring, and then they seeded the soybeans. And the soybeans, they look very nice in there. I mean, there's a little bit of lamb's quarters in there, but nothing that the carabid beetles can't eat. That's a good crop, actually. But over here, they actually seeded directly into the rye with their soybeans. But they had not yet used the blade roller because they knew that this rye was not yet flowering at the time of soybean seeding. And you cannot kill cereals with the blade roller until they're fully flowered, because otherwise they're just going to tiller. And so what they did here is they no-tilled their soybeans into this, and then once the rye flowered, they went on with, this is actually their blade roller, they went on with their blade roller, killed the fall rye, and the soybeans were about 10 inches tall at that time, and the soybeans weren't bothered at all. They came back nicely. And so I love this kind of farmer innovation, and this is what I said was kind of look into the future. You put some of these ideas out into the farming community, you give them access to some of these tools. It's always amazing what farmers can cobble together as a system. Now, in where you are in Alberta, there's areas that you've got quite a bit of livestock, and we've already heard some examples of how you can incorporate livestock in there. And so there's, that's also a very good tool. After this slide, I'm just going to say a few words and I'm going to stop. And it's really nice to see that some of this equipment is now being manufactured locally. This is Right Way out of Regina. They brought this machine to one of our field days and demonstrated it. And, the blades could have been a bit longer, but, it kind of did the trick, and it was good to see this innovation. So I'm going to stop here. I've got a few comments left, but if there's one or two questions, we could deal with them now, and then I'll finish.
Okay. So, when transitioning from hay to crop production, we find that plowing is a way to reduce tillage because they're able to seed directly into it without further tillage. They use a rollover plow. Are we damaging our soil with this method?
No. Especially if you're seeding a crop right after, in some ways the plow is the friendliest because you're just in one activity turning it over. A lot of those aggregates are not being shattered. And so you might want to read that Western Producer article that came out where I mentioned, tillage has been vilified and it's not that bad, because the author goes on to interview Bill Dean from the University of Guelph and other people who have done pretty good research. The worst thing you could do is to use that rollover plow or use a high-speed disc and then just keep disking that field all year and have basically, 3 months of fallow. That's not good. And also the speed of tillage can really affect soil health, because if you're, really going very, very fast and you're shattering the soil aggregates, that can be negative. Sometimes you need to do that. But the plow is actually a much slower implement. And so my answer is no, but you have to, whenever in organic agriculture, I think a rule of thumb is when you've tilled this field, pull out the seeder and go seed something on it and restore those root systems in that field.
From Orist Frederick, after planting wheat in the spring, is there a mixture that I can plant to suppress weeds, add nitrogen, and then straight cut the wheat in the fall? Could spray if necessary in the fall. Do you have any ideas for that?
There's a lot of legume species that work well with wheat that way. Everything from red clover, white clover. I know farmers are starting to work with crimson clover. Haven't seen that much success with crimson clover. Grows well, but it's a little taller, and it has the advantage of being an annual, so it's going to grow a bit more in the fall. But I guess my response to that question is that's great that you're thinking about that, and there are many species to choose from, and especially if you're harvesting your wheat and you've still got 6-7 weeks of growing left, it's a great way to improve your soil health and add nitrogen. It's not going to add a lot of nitrogen to your wheat crop. If you want to add nitrogen to your wheat crop from a legume, you have to grow it with a grain intercrop like peas or faba beans, which is going to produce a much larger plant in that year. And there's very good evidence from especially Scandinavia and now in the last 10 years from China, where they've tracked using nitrogen 15 labels, how much nitrogen goes from a pea intercrop into, let's say, barley or wheat. But for after harvest, that's a great system. And I guess my one question is if when farmers ask that, I say, well, are you using pre-harvest glyphosate or not? And if you're using pre-harvest glyphosate and you're killing it at that point, you know, the value might be very limited because the amount of growth you'll get from that legume could be very small during that wheat growth.
Awesome. Is tillage the most effective way to terminate a fescue crop?
You know, you guys are the fescue experts. I'm just, you know, a dumb agronomist from, you know, around the Red River Valley, and, you know, so I don't really know. I do, you know, from my limited experience, I know that glyphosate really doesn't do a very good job on it. So what choice do you have, right? Maybe grazing it down really hard before you till it so you don't have to, you can reduce your tillage. I'm not sure. I can't really answer that. You are the experts more than I am.
All right. Are oats acceptable instead of barley?
Yeah, absolutely. For looking at there, sure. You know, wild oats work really well. Barnyard grass works really well. Any kind of grass is good. Yeah. The only thing about oats is that I would say for a lot of serious organic growers here in the grain belt, they're growing a lot of oats for grain. And it is good to always to rotate your crops, you know, even rotating between barley and oats so that you're not using the same plant in your green manure as you're using for your commodity crop.
Right. What about plowing after frost?
Yeah. You know, if the question is, you know, what does the timing of plowing do to your soil health and to your aggregates and to your soil microbes? That's where my brain is sort of going. That's actually a really interesting question, because if you do your landscaping, okay, let's call plowing landscaping. If you do your landscaping after your biological activity of your system is gone down because there's no more heat, you know, I could see there being some advantages to that, as opposed to plowing, you know, in the middle of the growing season when everything is really alive and active. You know, you're just putting a stop to that, and that's not really a good thing. So, and I know that for thistle control, in organic systems, deep chiseling after a frost is shown to be quite effective. And so you also could get some weed control out of it.
Awesome. All right. I think we have one person who's raised their hand, but if that's okay with you, I think we'll answer that question here at the end, and we'll let you continue back with your slides.
Okay, do you see the next slide? It's an advertisement for blue and red equipment. Yep. Got that? You can see it? Okay, yep. Good. You know what they say, if it's not red, leave it in the shed. I read that on a farm in Ontario. And I have a little farm, and I have a red tractor, but I just hope it runs this summer. So this is actually the crop rotation for Scott Beaton, who is the farmer I referred to earlier. And there's a number of things that Scott is doing to reduce tillage that are quite interesting. One is he's using a flail mower. And, you know, there's a certain satisfaction with the flail mower that you see on the upper right here, because it just looks after your crop and just gets rid of it. And so he's been using that for vegetation management. And I'm going to show you a slide a bit later where I think it had a really good role. In this picture here, he's flail mowing what looks like to be faba bean and oats. I think blade rolling this would have made more sense because it uses way less energy. There's way fewer moving parts. And the problem with flail mowing is you open yourself up to weed encroachment much faster because the plant material degrades much faster than when you blade roll it. So I'm just saying, especially if you look at the trees here, they're still green. If you're getting rid of your cover crop in sort of that August period, early August. That's just a reality. But the other thing that he's doing to deal with his green manures is grazing. And the bottom left here, you can see these cow-calf pairs. So that is quite interesting. His economics is showing that planting a cover crop and then grazing them, he's making about $30 an acre, including the fencing costs, and he's put in pasture pipeline here. And this actually, we had done quite a bit of research on this, and we actually found pretty well exactly the same thing, that instead of losing close to $200 an acre on spending a whole year on a green manure crop, when you include the fixed and the variable costs, the grazing would give you a small profit. And it was really interesting to hear Scott tell our students when he gave this presentation to our students. So, you know, here's just a contrasting way to control the vegetation without tilling. One is either flail mowing, or we could have rolled. So there may be a livestock question coming up, but I want to talk a little bit because we're really talking about no-till farming here. So we did a lot of work looking and comparing the different tools for terminating green manures. So we looked at the flail mower, which you can see here. We looked at the blade roller, and then we also looked at the wide blade cultivator. And this is my slide to make fun of people in Southern Alberta. I don't know if that's a nice thing to do. Maybe, you know, they get all the, you know, they got the NHL team, and, you know, you should have an NHL team in the Peace River. So that's my, you know, and this is the funniest sign to a town I've ever seen, but I love it because, you know, this Nobleford, Alberta is where the Noble Blade came from. And so we actually did some research comparing the Noble Blade, comparing flail mowing, and comparing that to blade rolling and to tillage. And we did that work at Lethbridge and at Carman, Manitoba. And again, the purpose was to decrease tillage in the annual green manure year. Now, here you should be seeing the tractor with the wide blade cultivator going through the green manure. And over here on the right, we went, that's the blade rolling treatment. And here we're going through with the wide blade cultivator. And this machine, as you will very well know, was not designed for this purpose. It was really designed to go into summer fallow, where you had a few weeds and you could just undercut the weeds and let the residue stay on the surface, so you'd have reduced soil erosion. But we got this thing to work in the green manures. And it was pretty good, a pretty good tool. The benefit of this over the blade roller, of course, is you're getting weed control. If you would have quackgrass in here, if you would have Canada thistle in here, you're getting some weed control with this tool that you would not get with the blade roller. This just shows some of the data that Kristen collected. Here we're looking at soil temperature, you know, after planting. And of course, in a reduced tillage system, we're always interested in how much we're depressing the temperature and whether that's going to cause a problem. So the highest temperatures after seeding were where we used tillage, or where we used the blade roll and then we tilled. And then the lowest temperatures were where we blade rolled, or where we used a wide blade cultivator. We thought maybe the wide blade would give us a little more of a temperature boost, but it didn't. But nevertheless, we grew some pretty good crops. And so this implement here, I don't know if there are any in the Peace River region, but you know, we still like to use it in our organic system. It does sometimes make a mess of the soil, like when you're going through a green manure crop, you know, which is rooted. It does plow this furrow, which creates, you know, which creates a bit of a problem. So when we do it right, you know, this is what we end up with: a nice organic no-till wheat crop. You know, really, we've had we've done this for, like I said, over 10 years at Carmen, and people who visit our farm are always really impressed that this is even possible. I would say it's only possible because in the other phase, the 6-year rotation that we have there, we are not shy to use fall tillage, and that looks after our thistle. And we also have a rotation that allows us to really deal with wild oats, which means putting fall rye in the rotation, putting the green manures in. Because if we had a lot of wild oats, if we had a lot of Canada thistle, I don't think this system would work. So I want to end with this. This is the second to last slide. So the flail mower, I think, if we're growing a crop like, barley, peas, I just think we're spending a lot of diesel fuel killing that mixture with the flail mower. The blade roller is more efficient. But here's a picture again from Scott's farm, and he's using a fairly innovative green manure here. He's done things like growing sweet clover along with his wheat crop and harvesting the wheat crop, and then flail mowing the sweet clover or the red clover that fall already, and then maybe getting rid of it and putting another grain crop in the next year. I think Scott has been fairly innovative in his cover crops because he's putting, and when he grows an annual green manure, he always puts a crop like clover in with it so that he gets lots of growth in the fall period. And then he's using the flail mower to deal with that. This field, of course, has to be tilled if you're going to seed a grain crop into it next year, but it allows the tillage to be reduced. And it'll also allows you, if you're growing a green manure crop for nitrogen, it allows you to grow a crop like clover, and then you can mulch it and then have it regrow and just make more nitrogen. So with that, I want to for your attention. I know it's been over an hour and a quarter. So if there's any final questions, we can talk.
All righty, thank you so much, Martin. I'll let anybody who has questions in the Q&A just do their typing. I see we do have a hand up, so I'll let Mark come back and talk again, and if he's still around.
I'm here. Yep. Okay, now the plowing concept, we have found in our clay soil to get a good plow, most effective to do a spring plow. And then what we've actually done 2 years is we leveled it as quick as we could and seeded it into peas. Mm-hmm. What we did discover is we were taking out grass pasture stands, and when we had a wet year in 2018, the grass was aerated and came back with a vengeance, and really enjoyed that. You got any thoughts of what we can do to keep that at bay for at least the first year?
Yeah, I guess the question that I would have is how has that compared with years that you've fall plowed it, and has the fall plowing allowed you to get a better kill on the grass?
Tough one to find 2 years that are exactly the same with your spring and your fall, and typically we wouldn't get as good a plow in the fall.
Yeah, because it's dry.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. That's a problem, right? Yeah. I guess, I'm not surprised that would happen if you have the perfect storm coming in where you've got, you've plowed it, but then you've got lots of rain. Your propagules from your growing points from your grasses are still there. And the beauty of plowing in the fall is that you're going to kill a lot of those growing points over the winter. You've really stressed the plant by plowing it, and that a lot of it's going to winter kill. It's going to dry out. And even with glyphosate, when we did a lot of our no-tilling out of forages, fall glyphosate was always much more effective than spring glyphosate, which was really much more hit and miss. But if it's dry in the fall, I know, you can't get anything into the soil, especially if you got clay soil, which I know all about around here. This is, clay belt here too. So it's difficult. So another question I have for you is, how do you think it might work if you would have used a high-speed disc to kill that? Or would it even go into a fescue stand for spring termination?
I plan on having my first experience with that this year.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up doing some summer plowing in July because conditions didn't allow us to get it any earlier to seed anything into it. So it laid fallow. So since it laid fallow and undisturbed for the balance of the summer, I anticipate that grass to be willing to come back. So that is one of our plans on that stand this year, is we'll level it and then hit it with a high-speed disc right before seeding.
You just tear apart more of the growing points, because plowing, I think that also answers the question from the earlier question about how plowing actually affects soil health. If plowing does a less aggressive job at tearing apart your fescue, it's also doing a less aggressive job of tearing apart your mycorrhiza and other things connected to soil health. So tillage speed, just on that note, tillage speed is a really big deal. If we're tilling really fast, we're definitely throwing our aggregates apart more effectively.
So the Noble plow, would we not run into a similar situation with grass patches in the field where they're just going to reestablish?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So
the Noble plow is this, what we did here with the green manure is just to see if it would work,
right.
To see whether it would release its nitrogen and I would say it provided a good seed bed, and if you had annual weeds, you were fine, but if you had a lot of perennial grasses, that's a problem. Yeah. So if perennial grasses are your big problem, then I would imagine from my experience and from what I've read, fall tillage is quite important at controlling them, or even spring tillage. But yeah.
On that note, Martin, we have a question about asking if you could talk a little bit more about blade rollers. Are there larger blade rollers available for larger acres, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the blade rollers, people have asked if a land roller would work, and it's better than nothing, but the biggest version of a roller is a land roller, which they can be they can help a little bit, but those blades on the blade roller are really quite important. Then there are other machines that you can buy on the market which are fairly large, which are more like choppers, and that's not a blade roller. As soon as you start chopping your material, it's going to decompose fast. It's not going to give you the same. So all I can say is Rightway in Regina is the one company that is building blade rollers right now in the prairie region. And I think I showed you a picture of them, and I don't think their blades are as long as they need to be to do a proper job of crimping. A lot of farmers have, there are some companies in the US, but they tend to be narrower units. So it's still a challenge to find a good manufacturer. And from my limited experience, Rightway is the company that I know.
Awesome. How have you tracked the soil tests and the soil health in your trials? Has it improved? Have you seen done earthworm counts, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. There was actually a thesis by Carolyn Marshall from Nova Scotia Ag College, from Dalhousie University. So you can write that down. You can access her thesis. She looked at all the biodiversity and the soil health connected to these studies. Carolyn Marshall. The combination of the reduction in tillage and the surface mulch, especially with diverse plant communities, really gave a nice boost to soil health in terms of earthworms, in terms of carabid beetles, in terms of mycorrhizal fungi. So, you know, based on doing this for 20 years now, I'm not afraid of tillage in terms of soil health, but you cannot have periods of fallow where you till and then that land sits idle for 6 weeks. You need to get something on there fairly quickly. And that'll look after a lot of the, that allows you to till. So that's been my experience. We also have a long-term study at Glenlee where we've done organic farming for 28 years. And we've got conventional and organic, and we've got rotations with forages and with just grains. And the organic systems there are actually have got higher bacterial counts, higher mycorrhiza. And I attribute that to a richer plant community, which in that case is more weeds, but hey, they're diversity, so they've made a difference. But we have to be careful with tillage. We, you know, don't want to be cavalier. And I remember when I was much younger and we were out tilling, and my boss, who was an older farmer, came and he said, "Slow down." He said, "Slow down. You're going to cause too much wind erosion." And like, I've never forgotten that. And so even just speed of tillage makes a big difference. Better to have a wider machine and go slower, I guess.
Right. Anonymous question. I've harvested peas from spring plowing that look like a hayfield, still harvested 50 bushels of peas and 2 bales of straw and still had ground cover.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's a great story, because, you know, when you got a grass breaking, what is the plant that's going to do well in there? It's a nitrogen fixing plant that can handle itself under those low nitrogen conditions. So, you know, that makes sense to me. And it's not the first time I've heard of that. You just have to make sure you have a seed bed in which those peas will actually get germinated and established. And, you know, that's why peas are such a great intercrop as well. They can, if in a low nitrogen situation, they do very well. So, yeah. So that's a really interesting form of crop ecology that you just explained in that question. You know, you have a niche in that field, you know, an ecological space in that hay grass field. And that, my brain says that niche is a low nitrogen soil. You've got, you may have good organic matter in there, but that nitrogen is not available right now. You've got an opportunity to insert a plant into there that can make its own nitrogen, and it's going to have a competitive advantage over everything else. That's what you did in there. So you can give yourself a pat on the back for being a good agroecologist, because, you know, that's the cool thing about agriculture is we do all these things and learn a lot in the process.
All right, I think we've got 2 more questions. One quick one, and then we'll go to Michael, who wants to ask live. Have you tried a coil packer? Going back to that equipment question.
Yeah, we have coil packers, and the only problem with the coil packers are they're not heavy enough. So I like the idea of a coil. Actually, it's a very, very good suggestion. If we could put some weight on there, and to get enough weight on that coil to crimp the stem, that's really the measure of success. So if you can get that coil packer to crimp the stem of the grass, especially because lots of time the grasses is wild oats, you want to kill it. Yeah.
Right.
Great idea. That's a great idea. I'm thinking now, how can we take our coil packer and just put a lot more weight on it? Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like that.
I will see if I can get Michael unmuted here. No, maybe not. Well, that being the case, thank you all for coming. I know this ran a little later than some of our other meetings have, but we will, oh, there we go. We got Michael unmuted. We will be sending out the recording here next week sometime, and we'll go from there. But Michael, I believe you're unmuted now, so you can ask your question.
Okay, my question is, you had talked about seeding directly into the plowing and not tilling too much tillage. So if we were to plow in the fall and hit it with a land leveler just to make a smooth seed bed for the spring, is that going to work?
Well, I mean, you would know your soils, and I mean, I think it's all about getting a seed bed, right? Getting a quality seed bed to get your crop up and running quickly. And then if, let's say that was an organic system, which is what I work in, I would be, you know, thinking about the perennial weeds coming back. And let's say you've done a reasonable job of those. The land leveler, you know, what is it going to do to the weeds that may have germinated early in the spring? Perhaps it looked after them. Perhaps it actually stimulated a lot of new weeds because, you know, you're turning the soil and they get a flash of light and then they germinate, especially things like mustard and pigweed and lamb's quarters and broadleaf weeds. Maybe you have different broadleaf weeds there. So then if you were to seed your crop in there, if you had a good seed bed, you know, go in with your crop. And then when those weeds do come, let's say, especially broadleaf weeds, which I think would be a predominant weed in that system, then you could use a rotary hoe. The rotary hoe is that turning thing. It works really well in trash, and it works really well as before the crop comes up or after the crop comes up. So that's what I've been thinking about with that system.
Okay, and just one more comment. You guys were talking about fescue and using the high-speed disc. In our area, guys have tried the high-speed disc, a couple different versions of it, and ended up either plowing or disking because the high-speed disc did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, just too shallow, couldn't penetrate?
There's just not enough penetration or turning, and so they weren't getting any effectiveness out of the high-speed disc. And they, like I said, used the Dagelman one and then the one that Flamin ran, and neither one would do the job.
Yeah. Okay. That was kind of I was sort of waiting for somebody to say that, because they are actually, you know, they're not really good for breaking up highly rhizomatous grasses, especially when it's dry. So thank you for that. These questions and the discussion we've had is really good. I've learned a lot and I really appreciate them.
Thank you for your time, Martin.
Awesome. One last comment. We've got a couple of people saying thanks for the webinar, and one comment that the secret to plowing is no sod showing, a land leveler with exposed sod, and will dry out the soil, so spring plowing works the best in their experience.
Okay. So how many, just out of curiosity, like how wide are your plows? How many bottoms do you have? And how much horsepower does it take per bottom? That's a legitimate question. I'm interested. And if you don't know, you could let Joanna know and she'll email me the answer. I'm curious.
For sure. We do have a survey that'll open once you guys log off. So even if you don't quite have time to answer it here, you can drop it into one of the comment boxes in that. We've got one spring bottom plow, or spring plow, 8 bottoms, 250 horsepower.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
30 horsepower per 16-inch bottom is another one. Yeah, so I think
Great.
we will call that our webinar. And if you do have any further questions, you can email them to either myself or Marianne. We can pass them on to Martin. And we will be sending out this webinar here next week. Thank you all for attending. If you have any suggestions or want to give us our rating for our webinar, you can drop that in our survey after here. And yeah.
Should we just wanted to add you guys for next week. So thank you very much, Martin Entz. It was so interesting and very, very good questions. So really a lot to learn today. Just for you guys, I wanted to mention next week where the speaker will be Ward Middleton. And Ward, he is farming near Morinville in Alberta. He is an organic grain producer, and he works with his neighbor who is a livestock producer to integrate livestock in his operation. So whether you are a grain farmer or livestock producer and you're interested in working with vice versa, then just join us next week, Friday at noon. And I also wanted to mention OCIA and ProCert are sponsoring this webinar. So thank you for them. Because of their sponsorship, we are able to offer this webinar for free. So thank you to them, and thank you for joining us today.
All right, have a good long weekend, everybody. Take care.